Our guest today graduated from Yale University and the University of Chicago Law School. He has been named a part-time adjunct professor at University of Chicago Law School starting next spring. He will teach a course on public corruption law. Ladies and gentlemen, the Inspector General for the City of Chicago, David Hoffman. David? All right. We'll have some fun up here.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much to Jay and the City Club for the invitation. It's a true honor to stand up here. I'd like to recognize my family who's here, some members of my very large family. I didn't want to bring everyone. It would have filled up about a third of the room. My wife, Monique, is here. My mom, my stepdad, my sister, my sister-in-law. And you might think that I brought them here to ensure that I got a positive reception. Came to every single one of my trials when I was assistant U.S. attorney except one. And I will always remember one of them where I came, it's a very difficult trial, and I finished my opening statement. There was a break, came back to the gallery. I said, Mom, I thought it was pretty good. Mom, how'd I do? She said, that other guy's opening statement, it was great. The defense attorneys. So I was a little worried. Jay, when Jay invited me to speak, he asked me to speak about what we've done in the Inspector General's office. I'm going to speak a little bit about that, but I also wanted to take the opportunity to speak about the future. In thinking about my time in the Inspector General's office, I started there a little under 4 years ago, and I will also always remember I'd just been there about a week or so, and I was sitting at my desk, having left the U.S. Attorney's office. Difficult decision to leave an office that I was really enjoying. I decided that it was a job worth taking. It was an office that really had potential. It was an important office. It was an office that I believed could be run independently. And I got to the office, and I realized that at least technologically and maybe in some other ways, there was a lot of work to be done. There was no email. People had been told not to set up their voicemail. It was an office with mostly no windows that had been bricked up. It was an office that hadn't really reached much out to the outside. And I sat at my desk with no windows and no email, and I thought, what have I done? But it really has been a great experience. So I do think that the core principle of our office, of any Inspector General's office, has to be independence. The only way that an office like this can work is if it is truly and vigorously independent. And I have tried to bring the ethic to this office that I learned in the U.S. Attorney's office, which in very simple fashion is just to follow the evidence where it leads. If it upsets the entrenched interests, so be it. It's just not relevant. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. If the evidence justifies the action, then it justifies the action. I tried to add a great deal of experience to the office, people who had a lot of experience in the highest levels of law enforcement. I tried to focus on professionalism. We started a policy and practice of recording interviews of subjects, which I actually am a big believer of for law enforcement as much as feasible. We changed the rules regarding how you write reports, how you maintain evidence, to try to mirror the way federal law enforcement does it. I created a legal section to act as internal prosecutors and ensure that there was a thorough vetting of the evidence. We tried to reach out as much as possible to people who had intelligence information, who could be whistleblowers. We set up a tip line, which we staff with their own people from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. so that people can call even if they're not at work. We created a website where you can report corruption confidentially. We've worked with the highest levels of law enforcement in the city to make criminal cases. We have done wiretaps for the first time in the office's history, and I can say around the country this is very rare for a local Inspector General's office to be involved with federal authorities in wiretaps. We've worked with the U.S. Attorney's Office on joint cases wherever appropriate. We've even worked a case with the Antitrust Division of the Justice Department. We've worked with at least 8 different federal law enforcement agencies. We have a very close relationship with the state's attorney's office. We've worked a lot of cases with. And so our criminal cases have jumped from 2 over a 2-year period before I got there to 50, close to 50 in the last 2 years. Maybe more importantly, we've expanded from just doing investigations to also doing audits and analyses regarding waste, inefficiency, and effectiveness. And this is very much a traditional inspector general function. It was always in the law of the inspector general's office. It just wasn't something that the office had been doing. And I'm proud of our people. I know the office is filled with people of very high caliber. One of my favorite things to do is interview when we have vacancies and see the caliber of people who are interviewing for the position. It's an extremely independent group of people. I think one way that I focus on is who's coming in and who's coming out. We had a young agent somewhat recently who left the FBI to join us when we had a vacancy for a lawyer position in our office, and the woman who accepted our offer is here today and is starting next week. When we had a vacancy, the applications we received from folks in firms were just tremendous, people who were applying to our office and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it was very gratifying to see the caliber of people who want to come to our office. We, unfortunately, are having a couple investigators who are leaving shortly, but one's going to the FBI to be an agent and one's going to Northwestern Law School. So I feel very good about the caliber of people in the office, and I think that bodes well for the future. Overall, I think that, as I wrote down how I would sum up where we are as an office, I think that we've shown the citizens of Chicago that we are independent, that we are effective, and that we are confidential. When we see a problem, we will not pull any punches, and we will go where the evidence leads. We are in no one's pocket, and we are out to get no one. We have no agenda other than being independent and aggressively following the facts. And we don't shy away from exposing problems, even if negative headlines may result, because public awareness of government shortcomings is fundamentally in the public interest. And here in Chicago, my view of those principles and where we are should be considered normal and not extraordinary. I think that the Inspector General's office can play a critical role in how our government operates, how our city is viewed. And I have to say that when you compare our office to similar offices around the world, we're very young in our development. I do think that we've been operating in a very different way over the last 4 years. 4 years is not a long period of time, and I think that the office has a long way to go, and hopefully the development as the years go on will continue to move forward. I also stand here as a member of the Illinois Reform Commission, where I had the pleasure of working with Pat Collins, I think one of my commissioners, Lawrence Oliver, I saw here, and who wrote a great piece, by the way, in the Sun-Times on the Abadi case. And that was a fantastic and powerful experience. I learned a great deal about corruption problems in state government. We all attended a large number of hearings and town hall meetings here and around the state. We came out with detailed and sweeping recommendations. I think we're all very proud of that report. We participated and observed the legislative process down in Springfield, which was disappointing for us. But instead of looking backward, I really wanted to spend most of my time looking forward and ask some questions. And here's the fundamental question I wanted to talk about today, and that was, what should our future look like on the issues of corruption and reform? There's a lot of time, we're spending a lot of time talking about 2016. What will the world look like for us here in 2016? My son will graduate from high school, hopefully, in 2025. What will the world look like here in 2025 on these issues? What will these issues be like for us? And here's another fundamental question. What will our reputation be? What will the reputation of our city and our state be around the nation and around the world on issues of corruption? What should we expect? What should we demand? For me, step one on this is properly describing the problem and acknowledging how big our problem is. I think it's fair to say, I think there has to be a consensus on this, that we have been living with a culture of corruption. As the state legislature's joint committee on ethics said in their opening statement, we are in an unprecedented integrity crisis. The New York Times had a front page story on Illinois and reform the other day, and their phrase was that Illinois is a national example of political corruption at the extreme. We have the head of the FBI in Chicago who says that if Illinois is not the #1 state for corruption, we're a heck of a competitor. We consistently are mentioned in the same breath with one other state on these issues, Louisiana. This is a gold medal that we don't want, obviously. And we shouldn't dance around it. There is a reputation problem, an issue that we have, and we need to confront it head on. Because the fact is, we have been making history in the wrong way. Having two governors charged back to back, I don't know if, I thought maybe Professor Green might know if this was wrong, but I cannot believe that that has happened any other place in American history. The scandals that were occurring in city government when I was coming in relating to Hire Truck and the hiring fraud scandal were highly, highly embarrassing, to say the least. And all these scandals make it very difficult for us to claim the mantle that corruption is a thing of the past. And how do the city and state issues interconnect with each other? It's been very interesting in the Illinois Reform Commission work, spending time with people who are principally involved in state government, people who I wouldn't normally interact with. People in state government who I've heard, they tend to, especially ones who are outside of Chicago, they tend to blame Chicago for the problems of state government corruption, the problems of Chicago corruption and its history of Chicago corruption and so on. Here in city government, what I hear a lot when they look at the problems of state government corruption is, oh, it's archaic what's going on in Springfield. It's all those problems down in Springfield. But the truth is that it's very interconnected, if only because out of our 12.5 million people in the state, 2/3 of us live in the Chicago area. So our issues of corruption, whether they're state or city, very much interconnect with each other. It's important to talk about solutions, but in talking about the problem, let's not forget the importance of talking about the costs of corruption. I know my friend Andy Shaw is going to talk about this, I think, in greater detail tomorrow. But in my mind, there are three important areas about the costs of corruption that, while it may be difficult to put in precise dollar terms, are very tangible themselves. Number one, our reputation, the embarrassment factor. This is more than just the prick that we feel when our state is being made fun of on late-night talk shows. It's more than that. It's tangible. It hurts our ability to compete. It hurts our ability to lead. It trickles into our everyday morality and ethics. So the fact that this is our reputation and that it is embarrassing is a problem for us. Number two, the cost of corruption. Corruption leads to bad government. Corruption leads to inefficient government, and it creates harms. Take one of them, safety. Whether it's how licenses or permits or approvals are handed out for people who drive or people who build buildings. These are fundamental safety issues that can affect all of us. Corruption negatively affects those. Bad for efficiency means good for waste, means higher taxes. One of the things we learned in the Illinois Reform Commission was that in Maryland, a few months ago in February, there was an American Bar Association conference on government contracting. And at one of these discussions, the issue of contracting with states came up, and then Illinois came up, and immediately people started laughing. And after they told some jokes, what happened was that a significant number of large companies said, oh yeah, we will not compete in Illinois when it comes to government contracts. We do not compete with regard to state government contracts. It's just not worth the risk. The lack of competition means we get worse prices. Dick Simpson at the University of Illinois Chicago has estimated, I believe, $300 million as the cost of corruption. We heard testimony that maybe 5% as a lowball figure of state government contracts over the year have been handed out in improper ways. That's $500 million just in terms of state contracts. The third point is unfairness. Unfairness. And we should think about how you put a dollar figure on unfairness. When jobs or contracts or admissions to a university are handed out to people who have clout or connections or friends or contacts in the right places. And other people who are as qualified or are more qualified are not getting a fair shake. It is unfair. And those people are victims. They are victims of that form of corruption. And it is a fundamental type of unfairness because it is our assets, it is our money. So we need to count that in the pantheon of costs of corruptions. We need to count unfairness right there. I think another part of the problem is that too many people in the establishment define our problem too narrowly. There's too much of focus on what was the latest criminal charges, who got indicted, who was the most recent bad actor. What came a few years earlier doesn't count. And I think what that means is people in government are often too reactive. We're reactive to the indictment, reactive to the headlines. Pat Collins coined a phrase for this in a recent op-ed, given what we saw in Springfield, which was the Illinois indictment standard. We were very disappointed that some people in the legislature reacted to our proposals, including proposals about how the legislature should change its own affairs to a certain extent, by saying, why do we, the legislature, need to change? We weren't the ones who were indicted. It's governors who's been indicted. And it reminded me, when I started in 2005, one of the issues that came up, that's come up now, and Alderman Moore, who's here, has been a leader on this, is why is the city council exempt from the jurisdiction of the Inspector General's office? So in 2005, what I heard was from some aldermen, why are you focusing on us, the aldermen? There hasn't been an alderman indicted in a handful of years. And I'm not making up, that's what was said. And they pointed to the hired truck and other scandals and said, that didn't involve us, why are you looking at us? This reactive standard, this approach that defines the problem by the four corners of the indictment is way too narrow and it's way too reactive. So we deserve better. We do. And we really need to demand better. What we deserve is we deserve to be a model for the nation. But we have a reputation problem. And if we're going to overcome that reputation problem, we can't tinker around the edges. We need big and bold solutions in order to overcome the reputation problem that's been created. It must, look, the community, the business community, the media have been, I think people would acknowledge, tremendous recently. It needs to remain our leading civic issue. So fundamentally, I think it's time to stop being reactive, and it is time for us to have a proactive approach on corruption and a proactive approach on integrity in government. Governments themselves, it is the governments themselves who bear the burden of ensuring that they are ethical. They bear the burden of being proactive in stopping corruption. But it's up to us, the citizens, to hold them to the standard, because if we don't, then we effectively are tolerating corruption. Let's be clear, right? Greed and individual greed will remain in fashion. It is impossible to legislate individual morality. But the question cannot be who was indicted in the last 5 years. The question is, are we doing everything possible to ensure that this won't happen again, everything possible to transform our reputation? Now, my guess is that a significant number of people will think that this is pie in the sky, and especially in Chicago and Illinois, is not feasible. I hear this all the time. This is completely feasible, and this is doable. And one reason that I feel very confident about that is if you look around the world, we are not alone in having a reputation that has been tarnished. And there are places around the world that have overcome that reputation and have completely transformed themselves. And in studying this issue, I can tell you that I think the best place around the world that is a model for this is Hong Kong, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, and that did transform their reputation beginning in the 70s. I also, to the cynics who say we can't do this, want to invoke two people. The first is Daniel Burnham. It is in our tradition to transform ourselves. It is in our tradition to think big and bold and be visionaries about it and then execute it. The governor, Governor Quinn, who created our commission, invoked Daniel Burnham's name after we came out with our report. And I'd like to think that, guided by our leader, Pat Collins, we were within that spirit. But we need together to envision a future where Chicago and Illinois are genuine leaders in anti-corruption efforts, where people look to us and say that our expertise is not in corruption, but our expertise is in anti-corruption practices. And if this requires us to reverse our reputation, so be it. Well, we've reversed a river, and so we can do that too. Here's the second person, Frank Abagnale, who, as some may recognize, was the lead in the movie Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio. He was the very, very young con man who, after a short but incredibly prolific career as a fraudster, which is what the movie was about, joined the FBI and was brought into the FBI as really an expert in how to catch fraud. I would argue that we are the perfect candidate to become the global leader in anti-corruption practices. Who knows corruption historically better than us? So who could be better at understanding how to catch and prevent it? And I understand that that could be dismissed as a cute point, but it's really meant to be serious. And one of the things I wanted to stress as a theme was turning something that has been a disadvantage for us in the future, in the past, into something that can be an advantage for us in the future. So how would we do this? At the most general level, I think that the way we need to think, if you look at a society that is strongest in terms of minimizing and preventing corruption, there are four aspects to it that are strong in all respects, like a four-legged stool. If you have one that doesn't work too well, the stool might fall down. And the four are our leaders, our laws, enforcement of those laws, and ourselves, our attitudes and our culture. We need to expect that our leaders are prioritizing anti-corruption and reform and are doing everything possible to call out corruption when they see it and are doing everything possible to prioritize the efforts to catch it and prevent it. Our laws, we need to make sure they're not loophole-filled. There was a great quote from an alderman who's not here when there was a potential scandal that came out in the newspaper, and they were talking about some significant developers who were taking advantage of a law to try to get some government money. And the alderman said, "These people are smart. They know loopholes." And from my experience in Springfield, I think it's very significant. You have to watch out for loopholes. If we want our laws to be tight and well done and strong in this area, we have to make sure they're not filled with loopholes. Third, enforcement. Our laws do not matter if we do not have enforcement. If you post a 55-mile-per-hour speed limit sign on the highway and everyone drives 90 and no one is ever stopped, it is as if the law simply does not exist. It are words on a piece of paper. Enforcement is needed to give meaning to them. And finally, our attitudes and culture. Tolerance of corruption enables it. And simply put, to be proactive about trying to stop corruption requires all of us to stop tolerating it in any form. A bit more specifically, I really don't think that it would take 30 or 40 years, and I don't think it's that difficult to transform our reputation. I think really we need two things. One, we need civic will to be continuous on this issue. And number two, we need more independent voices and more independent entities to be strong. I think if we had those two things, the transformation in terms of our reputation would not take that long. Let me say a little bit about Hong Kong. I think it's a fascinating, fascinating story. So in the 70s, Hong Kong's reputation was filled with graft, a thoroughly corrupt place. And what they began in 1974 was an institution called the Independent Commission Against Corruption. It remains in force to this day. It has some similarities to an inspector general's office in terms of the significance of its independence and so on. And they have a very strong investigations wing. They have a very strong audit wing. They also have a prevention wing. They have an education wing that goes around to schools and other parts of Hong Kong and talks about the significance of overcoming corruption. They don't shy away from using the word corruption as if all of a sudden we're going to melt if people talk about corruption too much. They have embraced it. They said our past was a problem, but we are committed to being the strongest in the future at attacking it, at preventing it, and from catching it, and from exposing it publicly when it happens. Well, now Hong Kong is pointed to by cities and states and nations around the world as the model to be followed. And just looking at some of the media around the world in the last few months and getting ready for this, it is pointed to right now. In Malaysia, they just a few months ago said we're going to create a Hong Kong-style independent commission. It's called the exact same thing. In London, with the recent scandal in the national government about expense accounts for members of parliament, there was a very prominent lawyer who just wrote an op-ed piece in The Independent last month calling for this exact thing and saying we're going to have the lowest turnout ever in elections. People are really disenchanted unless we have this kind of reform. One of the things that's interesting about this entity in Hong Kong is that their jurisdiction is universal. It covers all of Hong Kong government. As an example, in comparison, here are some aspects of city government that are not covered by anything equivalent to an inspector general's office or another independent entity. And the first is the city council, as Alderman Moore has been fighting to change. Notably, the government of Cook County changed that a year or two ago, and the Board of Commissioners is subject to the inspector general's office there. McPier is not subject to any independent entity investigating it. The Park District does not have an Inspector General's office. The Public Building Commission does not. The city universities, city colleges have a one-person part-time Inspector General's office that is not independent. And the Chicago Housing Authority has an Inspector General's office, but it reports to its own law department. Together, we are talking well over, even putting aside the CHA, $1 billion on an annual basis of public funds. And not that an Inspector General's office is a cure-all, but if we want to do the most we can to protect our assets, we need to be thinking about what is not being covered. A very, very quick additional suggestion. In New York City, they have an independent budget office. It is an analogous to the Congressional Budget Office at the federal level. It is a way for there to be have independent analysis and an independent voice on what the budget should be, an easy, off-the-shelf thing that we should look for in Chicago. The last thing I'm going to say about independence, which is very different and very a different subject that I'm familiar with, is importing something from this whole IT world and fascinating world of internet entrepreneurship. And it's the concept of agile development. Agile, A-G-I-L-E. And I had never heard of this before, and I learned of this when I went to a fascinating lunch presentation at Google the other day by a gentleman named Joy Ito, who was considered one of the leading intranet entrepreneurs and is on the board of the International Academy that hands out domain names and so on. By the way, for anyone who's in the public sector, if you want to really, really, really be tempted to go into the private sector, go to a lunch at Google. That'll really make you think, what am I doing in the public sector? So Joy Ito says, look, in the world of the internet and instant communication and ideas being transported across the world all the time, agile development is what everyone's talking about. And what it means is that if you're working on a project or you're putting together a product, you don't wait until everything is absolutely perfect and everything is final to show the world. You write your program, and maybe it's partly done, it's sort of good enough to get out there, you know it can be improved, and you put it out in the world. And you put it out in the world because in the marketplace of ideas that is the internet, and in that entrepreneurial world, people will jump in and start giving suggestions. And inevitably, the product will be improved through the prospect of lots of different eyes looking at it. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1, 10 sets of eyes are better than 2. And as I was listening to this very much about the IT world, Alderman Flores was there as well. I think we were 2 of the only people from outside of the IT world who were there. I was thinking about how it was very much a democratic endeavor that he was describing, very much a transparent endeavor. And what it was making me think about, in contrast to that, were 2 experiences, two endeavors that I had been examining recently. where there was the opposite, where there was really no external development. And that was the way the campaign finance reform bill was put together and brought out in state government, and the way this parking meter deal was brought to the city council. In both of those instances, information was very, very tightly controlled about what the plan was. It was revealed to the key people only at the very last minute, with little time for independent analysis, little time for examination. Really the exact opposite of what Joy Ito is describing is happening in the real and very cutting-edge world of the internet. Whatever the motivation is for doing that at the last minute, the effect is to make opposition to that plan much more difficult. And there are hints of this same thing with what's being discussed right now about the Olympics. There was a quote the other day that, well, we don't want to put out our plan yet about the Olympics insurance situation because we don't want to look like dummies. And believe me, all of us can relate to that. No one wants to look like a dummy. But it's just the wrong approach for government. It's okay. It's okay if you put something out there and it's not perfect and it's not wrapped up with a bow and maybe it can be criticized, because here's the deal. Maybe it can be improved upon. And if we take a cue from the way things are going in the internet entrepreneurial world and we apply that lesson to government, what's going to happen is you have much more transparency much earlier in a process. What would be wrong right now with regard to the Olympics insurance of saying a week from now, here's our idea, here's where we are with our idea. It's probably a little bit undeveloped, but let's put it out there. Let's subject it to some hearings. Let's hear what experts from around the world think about this. What's wrong with that? If some people who presented that idea aren't seen as perfect, that's okay. Two sets of eyes are better than one, and 10 sets of eyes are better than two. And the other thing is that there's no monopoly on wisdom. Let's not be so impressed with our own ideas. There's no monopoly on wisdom here. I'm mindful of the time, Jay, so I'm going to move to wrap up. And I want to wrap up by talking about the Olympics, and to talk about the business community here, because I do think that I saw there's a World Economic Forum that occurred, and there was a video that American companies put out about partnering against corruption, and about how corruption cost $1 trillion around the globe, and how much anti-poverty efforts could be funded if corruption was minimized or stopped. Well, obviously the same applies here at home, whatever the dollar figures are. And our standard should be, and we really need the civic and business leaders to share this, our standard should be not that we're correcting something that came out in an indictment, but that we've transformed our reputation enough so that we have the opposite reputation, so that our reputation is as leaders. And let's be mindful of the fact that we may be about to enter the world stage in a very, very big way, depending on how the IOC decision goes. And if we get the Olympics, I see it as a great opportunity. It is also a risk. Great opportunity for our reputation, also a risk for our reputation. We will be the showcase for the world, and the question will be how. Here's a quote from the Taxpayers Alliance group in London from earlier this year. Most people are excited by the prospect of the London Olympics, but the constant stream of negative news almost every month about bad management and rising costs will soon start to weigh heavy on people's enthusiasm. The picture that was painted to win the bid was far too rosy, and the lack of honesty and transparency about hidden costs like these runs the risk of killing the buzz for what should really be an awesome party. The question for us, I think, with regard to the Olympics is, what will we be showcasing? Cost overruns, clout, corruption, or a model of how to ensure that corruption does not creep in, a model of how to ensure fairness and true competition in contracting, a model of how to ensure efficient planning and limit cost overruns. So I do think that our reputation would be on the line, but it's it would be a tremendous opportunity to transform our reputation. There's a lawyer in Chicago named Gerald Skonik who wrote an op-ed piece in the Tribune a week or two ago on this exact issue, and what he recommended was that there be, if we get the Olympics, that there be an independent watchdog organization that's truly independent to manage this. And what I would say is, in focusing on this, let's maximize independence in our Olympic effort. Robust, independent examination is the best insurance policy for integrity, and it should be a fundamental part of protecting our public assets. So I'll close with these two things. Our goal should be to set the standard on fighting corruption and to become a model that others can point to for ethics and integrity. And viewed the right way, our past and maybe our future give us the perfect opportunity to do just that. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, David. You have on your table, almost a desk again for the 15th time. Ms. Netch, you know what that means when you say desks instead of tables. Yes. Pass up your question. You scared a lot of people, all I can tell you. Before we go, let's have a round of applause for the, we'll have it for the speaker, but I think all of us need to give a round of applause for the governor of South Carolina, who's really taken our guy off the front page. So there you go. There you go. And just remember that. Okay, well, we have several questions. Late returns coming in. Peter Benzinger asked this question. As a member of the Illinois Reform Commission, which produced an excellent report, what is your explanation for Governor Quinn's position on legislation for ethics and campaign finance reform? What can be done? Here you go, Dave.
The members of the Illinois Reform Commission have said that we were disappointed in the result relating to campaign finance reform. I do have to say that, as I mentioned in the speech, it was very frustrating because a lengthy bill with all sorts of new concepts came out at 3 in the morning and was the bill that ended up passing. And members of Change Illinois, including Peter, Dawn Clark-Netch, Cindy Canary, and others, members of the Illinois Reform Commission, we scrambled from 6 in the morning to about 10 or 11 when we thought we were going to testify to figure out what is this thing. Let's read this document that everyone's getting for the first time, figure out whether there were loopholes. And we determined that this does not constitute a tight system of limits. This does not constitute real and meaningful reform. But it's fixable. Here's a list of 8 or 9 things that, who knows, maybe the drafters of it just missed, or maybe they can be convinced to change. As an example, people were focused on contributions that were high enough to really look like it could really constitute undue influence. Contributions of 25 and 50 grand that over and over and over again went to Governor Blagojevich. And one of the issues was, what are the limits that are going to be put on political action committees for corporations, unions, other entities? And the federal limit on those PACs is $5,000. That's what we had recommended. And the state legislature's bill didn't say 5, it didn't say 10, it said 90. So we said, why? Why 90? What about a lower number? The state legislature's bill said, we will have no caps whatsoever on in-kind contributions. Well, if a campaign's going to spend $1 million on TV ads, and normally it would need to raise money for those to get that $1 million, and it would be subject to limits, which is the point. But instead, it can go to some other benefactor who can buy the ads for it instead of giving it $1 million. It's the exact same thing. So having no limit on in-kind contributions effectively blows the limits. So we raised those things, and we were told the bill's not changing, nothing's changing. So the list of things that can be changed, I think, is established. It was established by the testimony of Pat Collins at the commission in Springfield. It was established by the testimony of Anton Valukas, who testified on behalf of Change Illinois. It's not so much a question of where the reform community believes the issues are. It's really a question of will. And I think, obviously, I can't speak for the governor. He obviously has been reported as saying he felt like he was in a tough spot relating to the budget. But to the point of what I was trying to say in my speech, this needs to be our primary issue, and we need to insist not on tinkering, but on a system that's bold.
Okay. Good answer. By the way, this is a record breaker. Never before in the history of the City Club do we have this question. This one's from your mom. Oh, you don't think I was going to read that next? Now, come on. I don't envy you at all. I don't envy you at all, sir. Has there...
Yes, Mom. The answer is yes, Mom.
Okay.
Next question, Paul.
Give you 30 seconds to answer this. This is really good. I'm sorry. Has there been any one case that you were involved in that caused significant change to the city? It's a damn good question.
Yes, Mom.
There you go. That's a record, ladies and gentlemen. You know, there's no other place that gets a question for the speaker from his mom. Outstanding. Here's another record breaker. This question's from me. You are a city employee. Are you comfortable in dealing with other employees given your job description?
Other employees of the city?
Yes.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, yeah.
I give essay questions. Okay, fill the blank.
I think that, anyone who's been a prosecutor or an investigator or an auditor or, anyone in that world knows that sometimes you are doing things from your office or you walk into someone else's office and they're not exactly thrilled to see you. And that's okay. I mean, that comes with the territory. And being independent doesn't mean being unprofessional or impolite. But it also means keeping an arm's length regarding the rest of city government. And I think that's the right balance.
We're on a record-breaking tour. This is another record breaker for the City Club. Now we got one from your wife. This is really, and you don't think the City Club's a family, do you? Oh, by the way, to join the City Club, you need no clout, you need $50. So that's it. That takes care of that. This is unbelievable. Here's from your wife.
What do you think my answer is going to be?
Yes. Dear, what are other Inspector General offices doing across the country that you would like to see this office able to do? Any more family members here coming in?
You guys are not invited anymore. I think I would answer that question by talking about some of the things I talked about in my speech relating to both limits on jurisdiction and also I do think that the expansion that we did into the auditing world should go farther with regard to monitoring. I think that especially in the contract world, you see this both in the private sector and in the public sector. There's a real trend in the last 3 to 5 years about having independent monitors imposed during procurement and contracting processes while they're going on. I enjoy a good investigation as much as the next guy and a good prosecution, but it's really too late. It's really a failure of the process when that happens. And the best governments are set up to try to prevent that. And governments can do things themselves through good management. But good management is not enough, even by the best people. And that's why independent monitoring, you see this in the state of Massachusetts, you see this in Miami. A real best practice is to have independent monitors who are watching the contracting process while it's going on. You don't need a huge office, but it is an office like the IG's office, and this is where it's housed in Miami and the state of Massachusetts that can do this kind of thing. Honey, does this mean I can stay at work a little later tonight? Okay.
All right, we're done with your family members. Let's keep, I know, a little pressure. Okay, now we have a lot of questions, and our staff is not circling among you. Thank you for coming up and bringing them to us. Carlos Ponce. Carlos, where are you? There you go. This is another very good question. Is independence more important than accountability in government? How are inspector generals held accountable?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And, First of all, everything that we do in terms of an end product is a report. In a criminal case, it's a report that's public in the ultimate way because it results in a prosecution. When we report on an investigation at the end, when we believe that someone has done something wrong, it's a report to the mayor and the department head. And remember, we're not imposing discipline where you can't fire anyone or suspend anyone or void a contract or anything like that. All we can do is make recommendations. And the end result for us is a report that someone can look at and say, oh, those guys are dumb. They're overreaching on their evidence. They don't understand the standard of proof. That evidence doesn't mean what they say, and so on. So the most important way that we are held accountable is because our product is transparent. And then on the non-investigative product regarding these audits and things like that, it's been very important to me that that be as transparent as possible. Look, when we put it on our website and when we make it public, for anyone who's in, whether it's private or public, when you do that, that's a daunting thing because you're opening it up to the world, kind of like as I was talking to with Agile Development, and saying people may disagree with you. People may think, to quote the other person, you look like dummies. But that's okay. So that's number one. And, number two, I testify before the city council every year. Our budget is subject to the city council. And so that's an important thing. And I guess the last point I would make, because I think it's a very good question, the issue of interviews, which is an important issue for investigative bodies in terms of how you're conducting your interviews. To me, the more you record those interviews, the better everyone is. The entities that have most resisted the recording of interviews around the country have been police departments. And really, you've had the defense bar arguing most for recording of interviews. I think that's a bad strategic call by police departments, to be honest. It really protects everyone. The more you record, the more it just takes away the issue of what happened during the interview. And then you can fight about, well, what is the significance of that? So I think those are some issues relating to accountability.
Okay. David, we have a lot of questions, so we're going to have to limit your answer to 1 minute or so because we don't want to have an investigation. Joy Saxon, hitting hard as always. China is not known for fairness. Are you really saying they have not interfered with Hong Kong government?
Well, I'm no expert in, I was in Hong Kong in 1990, but I'm no expert in the current China-Hong Kong relationship. And my understanding, well, obviously in the 1970s, Hong Kong was an independent entity. And so I suppose the question is, what is the nature of its independence vis-a-vis the People's Republic since they consolidated? And from what I read in the papers, including in London and other democratic capitalist places around the country, or around the world, Hong Kong is still considered the leader. So that must mean that, and I do believe there's some structural, a lot of structural independence that Hong Kong has maintained. How was that?
Well, we're going to keep interrogating you. This is from Bert Weinstein. Bert, where are you? Cowards die many times before they're dead. There you go. Mom, be ready. How does a David Hoffman become a clerk to the conservative Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Justice Rehnquist? And tell us about your experience there in a minute.
So, when you are a law student and you are told that you may have a chance of getting a Supreme Court clerkship, you are told you must apply to all 9 justices, whether you agree or disagree, and that's what I did, and that's the call I got, and that's the interview I went to, and that was the job I got. And when law students call me, that's what I tell them. You really need to put aside your views. All law students read Supreme Court opinions and think, oh, I don't like this justice at all, and I love this justice. If you have the opportunity to get into the Supreme Court building for a year as a clerk, no matter who the justice is, you do it. And clerking for Chief Justice Rehnquist was a wonderful, wonderful experience. He was a wonderful man, and the opportunity to his practice was that. So we had 3 clerks, and we split up the cases. So I had a third of the cases where you were his advisor, and the key briefing for him was in walks around the court on the sidewalk, where I would carry my notes and would brief him on what the brief said, which he had read already, what I thought the points were, and get him ready for argument. And amazing that he was relatively anonymous, that he almost never got recognized. And sometimes we walk around 2 or 3 times around the perimeter. And I can tell you that experience sharpens your legal skill, intellect, briefing skills, perhaps more than anything else I did there. So it was a fascinating and great year.
Well, very good answer. Perhaps you can sort of do that and walk around City Hall with an alderman. 49th Ward. 49th Ward, Instead of ring around the Rosie, ring around the alderman. Okay, we have several dealing with citizens from Kathy Posner and a few others. What can we as ordinary citizens do to ensure that you keep your job? Well, I don't think we have a chance there. And continue your excellent hard work. You got 20 seconds to...
Was that from my wife?
No, that's from Kathy Posner, but, and a couple of others. So you have 20 seconds to puff.
Well, I think, not with regard to my job, but in terms of what regular folks can do who are outside of government. I do think that being vocal about, if you care about these issues and you believe that they're important and you believe that we can and need to change, then I think it's really, really important to be vocal. I think that over the years, and as I think about my dad's dad and his level of sort of cynicism and belief that things couldn't change locally, I do think that it's important to, when cynicism creeps in, to fight against it, to put it aside, and to recognize that when people say you can't change, it just doesn't make any sense. Of course we can change. But part of it is about how strong the effort is, how widespread the effort is, and understand that the interests that tend to resist change are powerful and entrenched. And so I think regular citizens who are vocal about this absolutely make a difference.
This is from Rachel Goodstein. Rachel, where are you? There you are. Okay. Has your staff examined the Michael Reese City? Take 2. Has your staff examined the Michael Reese Olympic Village deal? What is their analysis? What is your opinion? That's tough questions.
So it's important that when we talk about what we're examining and what our conclusions are, that we do it in a written and public way when we're done. And it's also important to not make a point about whether we're looking into something or not. So sorry to give a non-answer, but that's my standard non-answer on something like that.
Okay, we have 3 more that are not duplicative. John Hammerschlag, where are you? Okay, you gave a very long question. Your handwriting deteriorated at the end. We have to improve on that. It's basically dealing with the parking meters. I cannot read the bottom of it, but I think it says, in other words, when parking rates are doubled and quadrupled, what is the impact on the number of the, more of a number of what? I can't read it. It's a good question. I just can't read the last part. Sure, come on up and read your question. We're breaking all rules. Since we had a mom and a wife ask a question.
Well, we used to be able to recite the question. So.
Well, you did used to be able to recite it. You want to go back to that?
That's fine, as long as you give me my question.
No editorializing. You just read the question as it is. We kill the mic if you go further. Go ahead.
I have read your report on the parking meter fiasco and agree with your comments relating to the inadequacy of the process, but believe that you failed to recognize the elasticity of parking rates. In other words, when parking rates are doubled and quadrupled, what is the impact on the number of cars parked, and how is that reflected in your report?
Yeah, that's a good question. Appreciate that. I don't know if everyone could hear it. It was about the parking meter report and about the elasticity of parking rates and how parking rates change and so on. We discussed the fact that there was a consensus that parking meter rates were historically low. We discussed the fact that there were good public interest arguments for raising the parking meter rates that would have a variety of collateral effects, traffic, and number of cars, and so on. There were also public interest factors to consider on the other side. We heard that local businesses, for instance, were likely to be upset about the rates for meters outside their shops to be raised. So we were agnostic and not taking a position on whether the rates should have been raised or not. That really wasn't our job. Our point was that in examining a lease of public assets where any government's going to give up a large revenue stream, is going to enter into a 3-generation lease to give away parts of its control over parts of its streets and the parking meters, that it's critically important that there be sufficient time and independent analysis and discussion to figure out whether it's in the public interest. And as we looked around the world and saw how other states and countries do these public-private partnerships, there's a very established model for consideration of exactly the point you're talking about. What should be the proper parking meter rates? Are they too low? Should they be high? Should they be? How high should they be? Where was that discussion in the city council? And most would say it was impossible for that kind of discussion to occur because the entire thing was presented and then there was a hearing the next day and a vote the day after that. And our purpose in bringing out this report, remember, was this is going to come up again in the future, almost certainly, whether it's Midway Airport or something else. And if we have a process in the city that maximizes the ability to consider these sort of issues relating to the public interest, it's going to think about what rates are going to be charged at Midway regarding concessions or things of that sort. So the same issues will come up, and we believe the process can be done a different way.
2 more questions, just for all of you. Sitting here will be done. This is from our own Norma Ray. Please introduce and acknowledge the members of your senior team that are present. They deserve a great deal of praise. You got anybody here?
I'm aghast that I missed the opportunity to acknowledge my senior staff who are here, who have done a wonderful job. And there are 5 of them. Mary Hodge, my first Deputy Inspector General. Dave Grossman, who's the Director of Investigations and Audit. And 3 of our attorneys, T.J. Hengesbach, Nick Schuler, and Sue Che. Both Dave and Mary were critical components of Operation Greylord, which was the very well-known law enforcement case on Cook County judges and other people in the Cook County justice system. And unbeknownst to them, they were working on the same case at the same time. Dave is the supervisor of the FBI of one of the squads, and Mary is a Chicago police detective who was detailed to the FBI and was sitting in a wire room listening to the bug at Counselor's Row. And it wasn't until they joined this office that we realized that they had been working on the same case from different parts of the FBI at the same time.
And like the record show, none of them left. The last question is always from Mr. Mazur. Again, it deals with your mom. The one trial your mother did not attend, was it a win or a loss?
I was very much off my game. It was clearly a subpar performance, but helped by an excellent trial partner, I think we managed to win.
How about a big round of applause?